Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. Our interview this week is with Mr. Todd Dalotto, who is currently the Chief Science Officer for Zebra, a cannabis drink company, and he's had a history here in Oregon. I've known him about 30 years or so, but we'll have an interesting conversation. We have our Hemp News segment coming up first, of course, but as we always do, we bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight is from the great state of Mississippi. Licensed medical dispensaries have begun selling cannabis products to qualified patients this week. Mississippi lawmakers passed comprehensive legislation last February regulating the production and dispensing of medical cannabis products. The legislation was enacted 15 months after state voters initially passed a similar medical marijuana legalization initiative. However, the courts later struck down the state citizen initiative process, thus nullifying the 2020 election results. Marijuana access has been long overdue for Mississippi's patients. The overwhelming majority of voters decided in favor of this policy change over 2 years ago, and lawmakers had an obligation to ensure the process of providing access faced no further undue delays. An estimated 1,700 patients are registered with the state to access medical marijuana under the law currently. Over 150 medical dispensaries and over 60 cannabis cultivators have received state licensure. Sales at the select locations are anticipated to continue starting today, Friday. Under the law, qualified patients may purchase up to 3.5 grams of marijuana flowers or up to 1 gram of cannabis concentrates per day from licensed dispensaries. Patients are limited to purchasing no more than 3 ounces of cannabis flower per month. Home cultivation of cannabis is not permitted under Mississippi's law. Our next story is from Chicago. Neither current nor past cannabis use is associated with an elevated risk of high blood pressure, according to data published in the Journal of Clinical Hypertension. Investigators with Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine in Chicago assessed the relationship between cannabis use and blood pressure in 4,565 adults. They found no correlation between cannabis consumption and the likelihood of receiving a medical diagnosis for hypertension. The full text of the study, Sustained Cannabis Use Does Not Predispose Clinical Hypertension, Findings from a National Survey, appears in this month's Journal of Clinical Hypertension. Out of London, England, the use of cannabis products containing THC and CBD are safe and effective in mitigating the symptoms in patients diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder, according to a case series reported in the journal Brain Sciences. Emotionally unstable personality disorder, also known as borderline personality disorder, is a common mental health disorder associated with a range of chronic and debilitating symptoms, including impaired social functioning, unstable mood, and risky, impulsive, or self-injurious behavior. The full text of this study, Cannabis-Based Medicinal Products in the Management of Emotionally Unstable Personality Disorder, a narrative review and case series, appears in Brain Sciences. Our last story tonight, it's time for the Department of Justice from the federal government to deliver the pardon certificates that President Biden promised last fall. President Biden announced the issuance of marijuana-specific pardons on October 6th of 2022, more than 3.5 months in the past, as part of a widely supported set of actions recognizing the folly of federal cannabis prohibition. Thousands of people with federal criminal records for simple marijuana possession are eligible for a pardon that would help them obtain housing, employment, education, and more. In fact, I have 2 federal marijuana possession convictions. One in Washington, D.C., in the United States Capitol, arrested by the Capitol Police back in 1990, and the other right here in Portland, in my home, when the police kicked in my door and charged me with cultivating marijuana. I was found not guilty of cultivating marijuana, but guilty of simple possession of 2 grams of cannabis. So I have 2 pardons that I'm waiting and hoping for. Unfortunately, more than 3 months later, the Department of Justice pardon website indicates that the applications to obtain a pardon certificate are still unavailable. Please ask the White House to direct the Department of Justice to open the application process without any further delays. You can also ask our Representative Earl Blumenauer, who's a supporter of marijuana legalization for his whole career. A presidential pardon does not expunge a criminal record, Still, the pardon certificate can go a long way toward helping someone with a conviction to avoid the many collateral consequences associated with a criminal record and live a more fulfilling life. Many of the people who are eligible for these pardons have been waiting years for relief. We shouldn't have to wait any longer. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. Now we go to our interview with Todd Dalotto. If you or a loved one are looking to find a doctor who can help you get a medical marijuana recommendation anywhere in the United States, then we have a physician referral service. Please call us at 503-235-4606. Again, that's 503-235-4606. Here is Todd Dalotto. Stay tuned and help us restore him. Good night. I would like to welcome onto our show Todd Dalotto, who is a longtime friend and acquaintance. I've known more than 30 years or so, I think now. Todd had been Hungry Bear Hemp Foods. You had the Seedy Sweeties for many years back in the 90s. And now you've been working with various products. So it's good to have you on the show here, Todd.
Yeah, happy to be here, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, I think last ran into you at an event in Colombia, I think it was.
Yeah, we were in Medellin at some big industry conference there. Yeah, MediWeed, I think it was. Yep.
Yeah. So let's start off with what you're doing today. I noticed that you've been an executive with a company that's producing cannabis drinks. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm a board member and chief science officer of Zebra Brands. It's a global cannabis company based in Vancouver, BC, and yeah, the Oregon cannabis industry filled up fast. Oh my gosh, there's so many cannabis enthusiasts in Oregon who wanted to open up businesses, and so the crowded space kind of made the international scene a little more appealing because, they're going to be constantly legalizing for the next couple of decades or so, all around the world. So that's been very exciting for me. I've been doing a lot of stuff in Latin America. When we met up in Colombia there, I had set up a breeding program near Bogota, and for one of our company's subsidiaries there. And that's been going really well. They're putting out some good cultivars from some of the breeding we got going. We had some stuff going on in Holland. We were one of the 5 finalists for the national medical licenses. They were turning Bedrocan's monopoly into a duopoly, and we made it through the top 5 candidates there. But on our last trial, our cannabis was too potent for their standards. It was too high, and so we were disqualified. But anyway, what we're currently doing in Mexico, our company's subsidiary Desart had won an amparo. An amparo is a Supreme Court ruling that, how in the U.S., when you win a constitutional case in the Supreme Court, you basically win the right for everybody. In Mexico, the amparo grants that exclusive right to the party who filed the amparo. And once the federal government gets 3 amparos that are pretty much identical, then they send it to the legislature to have the legislature legislate it and make it law. And that's how adult use cannabis is currently constitutionally legal in Mexico, as well as CBD, low THC, and such. Because of these amparos, and there have been hundreds of amparos, mostly for personal use. There have been very few that got through that are for commercial. But as we know, the president of Mexico, AMLO, is not very pleased with the prospect of cannabis legalization in Mexico, although the rest of the country is excited about it. So when the president doesn't like something, it moves very slowly. And so the legislature has not been taking up a successful bill for several years, and so that'll probably just keep dragging on until the presidential administration which is another year and a half, almost 2 years away, will change for the better, hopefully. And so our Amparo is for low THC, under 1%. And so that basically gives us the constitutional ability to cultivate, manufacture, distribute, import, export, sell domestically, just about anything commercially you would want to do with less than 1% THC. And we're the only company that has that all-encompassing Amparo. There are a few other very limited commercial Amparos out there for very limited kind of manufacturing or import. And there are a bunch of personal Amparos that give people the personal right to grow and such. But we're the only commercial ones, and so we're waiting for the authorization from COFEPRIS. That's the Mexican FDA. They're the ones who are in charge of issuing the guidelines, and so we're awaiting those guidelines to be issued before we could put seeds in the ground. So yeah, we're expecting to put seeds in the ground this spring, and get some commercial CBD crops going in Mexico. So that's mostly what's occupying me these days. And I'm also looking at other ways, that OG people, OG cannabis people, can be successful in the industry. We've both seen how things have changed quite a bit with who gets to finance and control companies, and so I've always kind of gotten into this industry as a way to kind of create opportunities, especially with social and economic equity. Giving people who are affected by the drug war the most the opportunities to have businesses, and we haven't really figured that out yet exactly. Some states like New York have kind of equity. The legacy growers, and that's a work in progress too. But yeah, social equity, economic equity is, I guess, in any topic, is a challenge when the people who are kind of in control of setting policy for equity are often the beneficiaries of the inequity. So a lot of challenges now that cannabis is big business.
Yeah. It's true. I think how I got taken by a different group up in Vancouver, BC myself. Toronto.
Yeah.
That's another story. So you're producing a drink product, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that for Canadian consumption?
Yeah, so we have several lines of cannabis beverages that have been developed, both CBD and THC, and we currently have a couple brands that are being manufactured and distributed in Canada under their federal legalization program. Our pilot was Vicious Citrus, which is a lemonade that's CBD and CBN infused, and it's it did extraordinarily well. We got it out in the middle of the summer. We were hoping to get it out earlier in the summer, when people are really drinking a lot of lemonade. But for a launch, in the middle of the high season, it became one of the top 29 bestsellers in the country very quickly. So yeah, it's a very delicious beverage, and it's a really difficult task to formulate cannabis beverages when you're using water soluble compounds, because that the nanomolecule it produces an awful bitter taste that takes a lot of kind of formulation to really balance the flavors and and everything. So we worked with some top-notch, scientists and formulators, both in the beverage industry and the chemical manufacturing industry, and we really got a delicious tasting product. So yeah, it's doing really well up there in Canada, and we're looking at getting our CBD beverages down here in the U.S. pretty soon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you're able to sell the THC beverages in Canada. Does it have as wide a market, or is it comparable to the non-THC products?
Oh yeah, the whole Canadian market is about the size of one city in California,
Yeah,
and
I know.
And each province is regulated a little bit differently. Alberta is probably one of the most restrictive and difficult to get through. But yeah, the big cities, Vancouver and such, it took up really well, and
Right.
people are enjoying it. So
being able to, you don't have any age restrictions on the CBD and CBN ones, do you? Or are there age restrictions on that, or?
no, not in Canada. Yeah.
So, but there are obviously for the THC varieties.
Right.
In a serving, say your typical can of your THC varieties, how much THC is in a can?
10 milligrams maximum. And so our beverage that we launched has 10 milligrams of THC and 10 of CBN.
And that's 12-ounce cans.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And they just increased the limit, the purchase limit from 4 cans to like 69 cans.
Oh.
So we're going to have to come up with a 69 pack.
That's pretty
so,
cool, man. I think 24 is probably, I don't know. But you get people to buy 2 or 3.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So let's go way back and talk about, like, I think my recollection is I first met you in Eugene in the water building on the Willamette River at a meeting where we were organizing to legalize marijuana. I think it was probably like 92 or 91.
It was probably 94. It was.
Okay.
And yeah, it was one of your early Octa efforts there.
Right. Several that we got 60% of what we needed. I did that 3 times in the 90s. Too bad. But it is what it is. But that I think was just before you started producing hemp foods. You were producing. How did that start? How did you start producing hemp foods? What led you down that path?
Well, I was an environmental activist at the time, environment and social justice, and I was also a pretty talented food crafter and cook. So I kind of put those 2 together. I actually kind of did like a vision quest. I took I traveled up to the Washington coast, and something told me I need to make hemp seed butter, which wasn't available at the time. And so that was my quest. That was my vision. And so, the reason I got into cannabis at all, sure, I always loved cannabis, but, I saw cannabis as the crop that has the greatest potential to enhance personal and planetary health. And that made me very enthusiastic. And especially, and at that time, most of what we learned about cannabis, we learned, through Jack Herer, Emperor Wears No Clothes, and Chris Conrad, and a few other people who, published, very limited information about cannabis and hemp. And so, I was all very well enthused. And so, my motivation was to get hemp into people's bellies. Lots of people were making clothing and bracelets, and it was back in the potato sack look, when we had those rough canvas hemp clothes, but we wore it proudly.
Yeah.
And those days were great. It's like you knew everybody in the room. When you go to an event, we were all pretty much in there to make the world a better place. We all had our own specialties of, food crafting, fiber crafting, paper making, you name it. We had our moments of infighting and a hard time getting along, but looking back, it was a really dynamic community, business activist community to really get an industry started, and now you walk into a big conference and you're lucky if you know five people in the room sometimes, and it's just so many new people involved,
Yeah. So
but
you started making these hemp foods. Tell us about your initial product.
So I first started on the path of wanting to invent hemp seed butter. So I had been doing a lot of research and visiting different food processors and food processing equipment manufacturers and learning a
I
lot.
think was a big marketer back then with his Hemprella products and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
We had
And
months ago.
Yep. And fortunately, I got my CD Sweeties out before Richard got his Hemprella, so I could claim the first hemp food business on that. But anyway, yeah. So I was researching, grinding.
Your name was Hungry Bear.
Yeah, I went by Hungry Bear at the time. Named the business Hungry Bear Hemp Foods, and so the research and development to really get hemp seed butter right was going to take a lot more money than I had. And at the time I was a hippie with no business skills, and I decided to start making treats, the CD Sweeties, as my pilot product to start generating some business, start getting some hemp into people's bellies, start getting and then using that as a vehicle to educate and such. And so CD Sweeties was my pilot product. And then, it took another year or so before I, got the research and development complete with hemp seed butter and worked with a local food processor who grinds, tahini and other and hummus and other food products like that, and worked with them to not only get the final touches on the manufacturing process, but to do the production itself. And so that was the world's first commercially sold hemp seed butter. Yeah.
I remember seeing the CD Sweeties in many different places. How widely were those distributed at the height of the CD Sweetie market?
Nationally, I actually didn't have, it was hard to get hemp foods into the major distributors, Mountain People's Warehouse. And that's what Richard Rose did. He kind of broke that ban by getting,
because he had the Soyrella products before.
Yeah,
so
Sharon's Finest. Yeah.
All those products. So he had an in before he discovered him.
Right. Yeah. So it's a lot easier to add a hemp seed product to a menu of already successful products than to be the new guy on the block with his first product. So I was really doing all the distribution myself, locally in Eugene by bicycle, and I'd take some deliveries up to Portland sometimes, but UPS really got the CD Sweeties out there. And so a lot of the store owners and managers and buyers were so enthusiastic about hemp and about my product that they were willing to deal with an individual vendor across the country, when they could easily just check off an order on their big distributor buying schedule. So I really appreciate having that kind of support and flexibility from those business owners way back there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the product. I remember you had whole hemp, unhulled seeds. This was before anyone had hulled hemp seeds, really. Tell us how that product, what it was like, and how you developed the butter. Did you go ahead?
Yeah. So CD Sweeties, it was a little bar. And it was based in caramelized sorghum syrup. And sorghum, of course, is also a multi-utilizational crop for food, fiber, and fuel. So I figured that would be a really fitting, product to use. And it also, of course, complemented the flavors very well. But it's such a small industry. I kind of bought them out, bought out all their supply. There's only two places in the country where it's made, in Texas and Louisiana. So I modified it and turned it into brown rice syrup mixed with molasses, and I got a very similar flavor. So caramelized sorghum syrup with other nutritional seeds in it, sesame seeds, and cashews and such. And so it was nice and chewy. And so at the time, the only hemp seed that was available was whole hemp seed, that was basically imported on the birdseed market. So
Right.
we had to ensure, very sanitary, conditions, cleaning of the seed and sourcing, and so, of course, steam sterilization, which is the requirement for entering the country, diminishes the nutritional value, the flavor, the shelf life. It just really kills all the good qualities of hemp seed. But we
Yeah.
worked with that for a little while. And then some colleagues of mine, who had, did a lot of agricultural sourcing in China, sourced us some good organic hemp seed. And so to get around the U.S. law of steam sterilization, we had our container loads of organic hemp seed shipped to Santiago, Chile, and pressed for oil there, where they don't have those, dumb sterilization laws. And so we press it for oil in Santiago, Chile, and then ship it up separately, the oil and the seed cake, which the law basically says hemp has to be incapable of germination. And so pressing for oil certainly accomplishes that. And so we were, me and my colleagues were, able to offer the first non-sterilized hemp seed oil, in the U.S., which was the only non-sterilized hemp oil that was available, until Canada started producing, in '99, around. And so now we don't even know what sterilized hemp seed tastes like, because there's no reason to use it anymore. Yeah.
Right. Right. I guess maybe they still have it that way for the birds. I don't know.
Yeah.
They were the only ones importing it, though, when
Yeah.
I first started looking at it in the late 80s. I know there was some AP Wire story I put out on our hemp news.
Yeah.
At that time, there weren't websites. It was Usenet news groups.
Yeah. And thanks to the Senate testimony of the birdseed lobby in 1937, the birds
Yeah.
won't sing without it. And so they made
Right.
that exception for hemp seed. Yeah.
So you had the butter and the cake was separate. So how did you market that as an individual product?
Yeah, so the cake, we ground into flour. Well, we did two things. We recombined it with the oil and ground it to make the hemp seed butter. And then since most of the oil is pressed out of it, it just requires the addition of a little bit more dry grains in order to make it grindable in a stone mill, to a nice powdery, flour. And so that's what we did. We made flour mixes and pancake mixes, and sold those along the same distribution as we had in with the Seedy Sweeties. So that worked out really well too. And I also made a hemp seed milk. We also used that to make hemp seed milk, and so I was able to offer the first commercially available hemp seed milk. And of course, I couldn't get any contracts with any aseptic packagers, because they were afraid to deal with hemp at the time. So it was local distribution. Bicycle delivery in Eugene, Oregon, a few trips up to Portland, yeah, it was nice, using recycled bottles and yeah, nice, delicious hemp seed milk. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. I wish I had tried some of it back then, but
Mm.
I love it today. Now we can get it in most of our stores in this part of the country anyway.
In aseptic packaging, the same people who said no to me
I,
30 years
I,
ago. Yep. Hmm.
I'm happy to hear you at least broke the ground, got them start thinking about it then. So
Hmm.
was that a Hungry Bear product as well?
That's right. Yes. Hmm.
How long did you keep Hungry Bear as a brand going?
Well, the business itself, the production ended in the spring of '97, when I was set up for a raid at my business. There was another cannabis guy in the building, who rented in our multi-tenant commercial building, who was helping out medical patients and was one of the people across the country who were importing. Uh, Basically, it was hemp flower from
Chris.
Switzerland.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Chris Iverson. Yeah, um, and so and so they were, and basically, we didn't have lab testing back then. So so looking back, we could assume that it had a high CBD content. It was probably, 50/50 THC to CBD based on, the effects that I recall from using it. But anyway, it was a totally separate operation from Hungry Bear Hemp Foods, but I was the only one who had hemp on the sign in front of the building. So I got raided and charged for it. What actually happened was Fat Freddy up in Seattle
Yeah.
decided to do a little civil disobedience.
Out of Olympia.
Yeah, yeah. So he decided to tell the DEA that he had a package from Switzerland coming, to let them know so that he could stage an arrest and civil disobedience. But instead, he of course got raided, but also six other businesses, people, including myself, including an AIDS hospice in Florida, some cancer treatment center in Colorado. So there were 7 federal raids, and I think a couple people died from a result of it. And so that's kind of how I lost Hungry Bear Hemp Foods. They initially charged me, but it took 2 years for them to decide to drop the charges because they didn't have any evidence of any wrongdoing. They confiscated my computers and everything. So they took away everything I needed to run my business. But eventually, later on, I started Hungry Bear Hemp Foods as an online sale of hemp seed oil, some books and other products that were manufactured by other people. But
Yeah,
yeah.
most of the businesses today, they can't really, the hemp businesses in cannabis dispense, they can't imagine what it was like back then. You're producing a legal product, but at the same time, the police really don't want you to be doing that, and they'll do anything to take you down. And so I'm sure after 2 years being locked in a federal uh, charge and everything, that's
Mhm.
very, very stressful. I know I went through it myself. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, really, looking back, you can really justify calling it a war on drugs. There's a war on everything now, but this was really, militaristic, tactical, civil war of our government against people, and people went to jail, people died, people are still in jail. And so yeah, so whenever you meet someone at an industry conference who says, I've been there since the beginning, and they've only been in cannabis for 2 or 3 years. Well, that's not the beginning. Yeah.
so that started for you in 97 and it went on for a couple of years. By the end of that, if you got your computers back, they're kind of outmoded by then, and you must have lost your markets and stuff, but you you went online though and tried to maintain. How long? What was your next step after that? I know you taught classes on cultivation for quite a while there. Do you want to talk about how you went from that arrest
Mhm.
to the next stage in your career?
Yeah, so that so I lost my physical business, and so I that drove me up into the woods. I started living in an intentional community, an hour outside of Eugene, off the grid, solar power and everything, and that's where I had the peace and the space to finish the hemp cookbook, which was the world's first hemp cookbook, from seed to shining seed. And I had done most of the recipe development during the while my Hungry Bear was still in business. I had Friday night dinners for the people who worked for me to kind of repay them for the shitty wages I was I was offering them. And so we had a good time, and they gave me feedback on recipes. And then so by the time I was heading up to the hills, I had most of my recipes developed, and I just had to write the thing, which I didn't really have time to do before. So that was the next thing I did. And so the public, and so that kind of led right into when the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act was passed in '98. And
Yeah.
so, it was finally implemented, in '99-ish. And so, the state was basically acting as a registry system simply. They started the program very reluctantly, and so they didn't really have anything to offer patients in terms of finding resources. Okay, now it's legal for you to grow and share and use, but where do I find seeds? Where do I find plants? How do I learn how to grow? And how do I access a physician? And so that's when I co-founded the Compassion Center. And so it's an educational support and medical services center. And
Dr. Levesque was the Dr. Levesque.
And just like you, we all utilize Dr. Levesque as our first physician.
It is coming up on February 22nd of this year. Will be Dr. Levesque's 100th birthday. We've been about doing some sort of a tribute to him, but he actually celebrated his 90th birthday in our studio way back 10 years ago. So anyway, keep going about the Compassion Center in Eugene. I just had to interject that.
Yeah. So I think, if I'm correct, we were the first organization to move Levesque out of the hotel rooms he was working out of and into an actual office, which was a big step.
He started seeing patients in our TV studio, so we didn't actually have an office. We actually worked in Portland a couple of times out of the community police station.
Oh yes.
TV came in and interviewed Dr. Levesque in the community police station here in Portland. But go ahead. Anyway.
Yeah, and he also got into a little trouble around that time with not keeping medical records and standards of practice and such. And so that's one thing we did was I involved a few medical consultants, and we got the Compassion Center's operations, up to medical standards, keeping medical records, doing SOAP notes and follow-ups, physical exams, and everything to keep him on track with complying with medical standards and keeping his license active. And of course, he paved the way for other doctors to follow. And we were very eager to sign up several other physicians after him, to fill the need for patients who couldn't find a doctor who is willing to even talk with them about medical cannabis. Doctors knew very little about it at the time, but they were also worried about their medical license, their DEA license, and such. And to this day, we still have a big problem with cooperation of physicians, to authorize their patients, and likewise while you're still in, serving patients that way. And so yeah, the Compassion Center, we had a very enthusiastic community of patients. We set up a medication station to give people a way to come off the streets and not only have a place to use their medicine. We gave away free medicine through our Access to Excess program, and the medication stations were not just a place to use medicine, but to have community of people who were going through struggles with their health and their health care, or the law. There was a lot of things that patients just shared about the common experience about what they were going through as a patient who uses medical cannabis. And through that community, they developed solutions, or they developed community, and they helped each other out. And so that is one of the beautiful things about the early days of OMA, was it was all about sharing. There were no dispensaries legal yet. There was not the legal ability to sell it except for donation for your expenses. And so it was really built around patients sharing with each other and growing for each other. And so that was beautiful, but it still, of course, needed to be improved, to gain access, for.
Couldn't grow their own and didn't know anyone who could. And so, and it still isn't fully accepted, but it's becoming more so, fortunately. So much.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I created the education program at the Compassion Center, to teach people how to grow. A weekly class on just the basics of OMA, how you get registered, how you're protected, what to do if you're approached by the police, things like that. And we really just listened to our members and filled the need of our members in with class topics and services. And really the doctor services part of it really funded almost all of our activities.
Yeah.
We hate to charge money for medical care. It should be a right, but that keeps the lights on and keeps us helping people. And so medical marijuana era was certainly the next natural step for me after Hungry Bear Hemp Foods. And the Department of Human Services of Oregon at the time was very hostile to cannabis. They didn't want this in their agency. They didn't want to deal with it. They wanted to make it restrictive and unfriendly. And so that's when a group of us, including Sandy Burbank, John Sajo, a few other people, finally got a meeting with Higginson, the chief science officer at the time. While we wouldn't have gotten in the office if not for a big rally out in front of the Oregon. Well, it's the Oregon Health Authority now, but it was a DHS at the time. But yeah, there was a big rally out the building, so they invited us in for a meeting to, see how they could get some better press out of it. And that's when we started a work group with the state to meet monthly and to work on the administrative rules and legislative suggestions to improve the program, to hold the program accountable for their administration of the program and their treatment of patients. And so those administrative work groups turned into the Advisory Committee on Medical Marijuana, which was by legislation. I guess that was probably 2001 or 2002 or somewhere around there, maybe three. And so I joined as a member of the Advisory Committee on Medical Marijuana, and eventually was chair of it. So we worked on administrative rules in a more formal process. I was really involved on several other administrative and legislative advisory committees for the state to help, shape the law and administrative rules as we went along. And so, and so I was very active in the legislature up until a little after adult use got passed. And then all of the, just about all of the activist types like myself, all of a sudden didn't have access to the legislators or the committees that we used to. It was all the paid lobbyists that were working for the companies that were wanting to set up business that got access to the legislature. And they basically, Anthony Taylor was the only medical, they're like, okay, we just want to deal with one medical cannabis lobbyist, and that's Anthony Taylor of Compassion Oregon. So he's been their guy speaking for patients, since adult use really came along. Which also brings up another thing, which is sad, because almost all of the nonprofits that served patients are gone now. They don't, adult use really changed things. For a lot of reasons. A lot of the activists went to for-profit businesses as the for-profit opportunities came along, and just kind of left a lot of the nonprofits unfunded and unstaffed. And there are just very few left that are helping patients. Yeah.
So how did you transition from the Compassion Center? Weren't you teaching some independent classes in cannabis cultivation for a while?
Sure. Yeah, I taught an Oregon medical marijuana program course at Umpqua Community College down in Roseburg, and I offered other classes. After I left the Compassion Center, I was doing some independent classes on cultivation and such. And yeah, I had an office actually downstairs from Brian Michaels there in Eugene, with a whole bunch of other attorneys doing pro bono and good work. So that was a really nice community to have of attorneys, working around you doing good things. Cannabis has really been all about community for me. So now the community is really, really big.
What was your first cannabis experience? This is a question often on the set.
Yeah. My first cannabis experience. Okay, so before my first cannabis use experience was in the 5th grade when we finally got the ability to choose our own topic on a paper we're going to write. And of course, I was naturally kind of a rebel, even in the 5th grade. And so I was going to do it on marijuana. But then all the encyclopedias that I was going through, that's when I actually found out about hemp. And then the history of the American flag and, Constitution, Bill of Rights written on, all that kind of stuff. All that, so actually for the first time in my academic life as a 5th grader, I actually was. What's that?
What year was that? About 80 or 79?
Yeah, it's been 1980. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I wrote what I considered a really good paper that was well researched in what was the little that was available at the time, which is mostly encyclopedias. And I think I found John Sloman's book. But anyway, so I wrote a great little paper, but she didn't believe a word I said.
Oh, really?
And so she said it was well written, but the assignment was to write about something truthful. And so she didn't even check my resources and such. So that, that really started my interest in cannabis and revealing the truth about it. But my first use of cannabis, I guess I was 14 years old, and it was about a week after the first time I thought I used cannabis for the first time. when someone packed me a bowl of corn silk. you know, but I wised up to that really quick, and so yeah, it was
Was that
in
were you a Eugene kid?
no, I grew up on the Jersey Shore,
Oh, okay.
so I was living in Rumson, New Jersey at the time.
Okay.
And so I was up in my friend's attic, and we smoked some of his older brother's, good kind, which at the time on the East Coast, the kind meant it was Jamaican, not homegrown. Homegrown meant it was crappy weed, and Jamaican was, Jamaican and Colombian were the two, top shelf cannabis at the time, in those days. But yeah, it was. I was man. I wish I could have that feeling again. But it really just transported me into a different world, and a different reality. And the music sounded better. The colors and the visuals of the artwork around me seemed brighter and more interesting. The conversation turns to deeper topics.
And
And
I mean, it definitely was. It wasn't like you're sitting there doing it by yourself. It was something you did with friends, and that was part of the mystique as well.
yeah, and it was smack dab in the middle of the Reagan era, the Just Say No Nancy Reagan era, the early drug war escalation era.
Yeah,
And
I
and so yeah, so we were as middle school and high school people, we were being taught in health class that smoking pot turns you into exploding homicidal maniacs and will lead to other drugs. And so I saw people trying cannabis and loving it, but also realizing, hey, it didn't do to me what they said it would do to me. It didn't turn me into a crack addict, or so maybe our parents and health teachers are lying to us about cocaine. Crack was,
encyclopedia was right. Your teacher didn't know what she was talking about in fifth grade. That was
yeah.
clear. There were books out there that told the truth. That's what I relied on when I was in the 70s. I was about, 10 years older than you. So what brought you to Oregon?
What brought me to Oregon? About a year before I moved to Oregon, I was studying environmental science at WVU, West Virginia University in Morgantown, and and I started to become disillusioned because the coal companies really owned the environmental science department. And I had other issues. So college was getting in the way of my education at the time, and so I went out and lived on a farm for a little while, and then I hitchhiked around the country because I wanted to travel, see the country, meet people, find out what this country is all about. And then that brought me back to when I got back to West Virginia. I talked my best friend into moving somewhere with me. And I had been working previously for as a canvasser for social injustice organizations, and I could basically get a job in any city in the country through their canvassing network. And so through the list of like 100 cities, process of elimination, we reduced it to Key West, Florida, and Eugene, Oregon. And it was the off season for Key West, so we went to Oregon.
Wise choice. Wise choice.
Yeah, and so I got to Eugene, and I was like, this is the place to be. There were so many people who were like-minded. There were so many artists and craftspeople, and small business people that were successful, and you had a way to jump into as a small activist-based business and be supported in a place like Eugene that you couldn't do anywhere else. And so after being in Eugene for a couple of years, that's why I started Hungry Bear Hemp Foods and started it in Eugene.
All right. Well, now we're almost out of time. Now you're the chief science officer of Zebra. And how did you transition into that? Didn't you were with some other companies before Zebra, right? In
I was a consultant. I was pretty much the only cannabis industry consultant, for 17 years before before everyone with 6 months experience started hanging their sign out. And so I was doing consulting work. I was doing a lot of expert witness work. And yeah, I did. Yeah, I worked with a couple Oregon licensed companies, Oregon Sun Farms, and yeah, and so I was approached. I did some consulting work for the company called Organto, which is a organic, food international company who wanted to start a global cannabis division, and they sent me down to Colombia to do some consulting work, evaluating a farm and a business that they were looking to buy. And so they liked the work that I did, and then made me president of their global cannabis division. And then that global cannabis division turned into Zebra as a 100% cannabis company, because we were kind of limited in what we can do with as Organto. And so the reason I got on board as a leader of that company instead of a consultant was they gave me the opportunity to demonstrate that sustainable agricultural practices are also profitable. Logically speaking, if you enhance mutualistic relationships with microbes and insects, then you're reducing the fertilizer expense. You're reducing the pesticide expense.
and you're regenerating the soil, which is our duty to do.
Exactly. So all of these sustainability, aspects translate into financial savings. And so they were the only ones willing to give me that opportunity at the time, and so I jumped at that. And of course,
on that, I'm really proud and happy to see what you're doing these days. I appreciate you being on the show here. We have had Todd Dalotto with Zebra. Tell us, if someone wants to find out more about Zebra and the company you're currently working with, where would they go? How would they find out more?
sure, yeah, zebrabrands.com is where you find out about Zebra Brands, and then I'm at canresearch.net is my consulting website, where I also have my my online classes and other services and such. So yeah, those are two main websites for me right now. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we finally had you on the show after all these years, Todd. Thanks for coming on. We'll gotta come back at some point in the future and see how it's going with Zebra. But thanks for all your lifetime of work. And I remember when I first met you, you for the longest time had long dreadlocks, but now you look much more professional these days. But
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's been really good visiting with you again, Paul, and hope to run into you in Latin America somewhere.
okay. All right. All right. Thank you. Keep working and restore hemp. Good night.
Indeed. All right, hemp for health.